suggests to them that this writer is not quite ready to go, they move on. What we see in those first page panels over and over again is people trying to grab people's attention, particularly when they're writing thrillers or mysteries with something really violent, like a torture scene or something horrible happening to someone else. Well, I can understand why somebody might think that's a good hook, but here's the fact. It isn't. It's not a good hook at all. Because, well, a couple reasons. For one, it's going to be off-putting to some people, particularly if it really is kind of gross and violent. But more important, we don't know that person who's being mistreated, tortured, or whatever. We have no attachment to that character yet. The book just started. And ultimately, even though we're all nice people and we care about one another, you're just not wrapped up in that character, so it's not that much of a moving scene. What the start of a book always needs to do, first and foremost, is get the reader invested in the character. And I do talk about that in the book, Creating Character, how important it is that the reader identify with the character. This is the person, I'm going to see this story through their eyes and ears, and I want it to be a comfortable fit. I want to like living this person's life vicariously. That doesn't mean that the character has to be perfect. Doesn't, and probably shouldn't be. Who wants to hang around with perfect people? Ick. That sounds boring and intimidating. They can be flawed, but there has to be something about them that you can relate to or like or sympathize with enough that you want to continue living the story with them. And then, of course, you need to get a story going and whatnot. But first and foremost, the character. And then once the reader likes the character and is invested in the character, when bad stuff starts happening to them, as it should in any novel, and once they're invested in them, then they're going to care about whatever cliffhangers or danger you throw at that character. Same thing for when I see a book, sometimes people open with a big action scene. Again, that might work well, but that's the sort of thing that works better in visual media more than books, where you just don't care if you don't know the characters. I think sometimes people are imitating movies, action movies, or cop shows on television, which often open with a big, exciting action sequence, but they're counting on the fact that you already know the series characters or the movie star, whoever it is. It's not necessarily the best way to start a book. So at this point, you're thinking, okay, fine, Bill, thanks for telling me what not to do. What should I do? How should I open a book? Here's what I think makes the best opening. Unanswered questions. A hint of mystery. Tension, a sense that you don't know everything yet, but you'd like to, so you're going to keep reading to find out. And that unsettling feeling that even though you can't put your finger on exactly what it is, things are not right in this world. And just to be clear, this isn't just for mystery books. I don't care what kind of genre you're writing in. Unanswered questions are what keep people moving forward. They want to find out, oh my gosh, what's going on? This is weird. This is strange. This is not what I expected. What's happening? So they keep reading to find out. My very first book, Primary Justice, you can go find it if you want. It's still in print 30 years later, for Pete's sake. It's got a little prologue that's not even 3 full pages long, but I think it's what sold the book. It's why I'm here today, because there is some strange stuff going on. There's a little girl, there's an older man, there's a very odd conversation, and you read it and you think, what's going on? And then you move forward so you can find out. And I did that deliberately because the book introduces Ben Kincaid, my series character, and he's got to join the law firm and get a law case. And I knew that inevitably that would take some pages to set up. So I put in this little very brief bit of weirdness, this prologue full of unanswered questions to hook the reader in so that they would sit patiently while I establish character and setting and plot and everything else. That's what you want to do in your opening. Unanswered questions that the reader's going to be interested in getting the answers to, and tension, which I define as the feeling that all is not right with the world. You may not know exactly what, you may not know why, but there's something going on here. The protagonist's got a problem, or somebody's got a problem with them, or something is not quite right. And that's what gets the reader hooked and keeps them reading. So that's the opening you want to put at the start of your book. Longtime listeners to this podcast will know that I've had Dan Millman on before. People who have been to WriterCon will remember when he was the keynote speaker and gave a keynote that was fantastic in content, but what I'll remember forever was when this 70-plus-year-old guy did a handstand, freestanding, on a chair, a regular chair. It wasn't bolted or anything. He just did it. I hope I'm in that good a shape when I'm that age, and it won't be that long, for Pete's sake. But that was impressive, and he has such a profound understanding of character and character arc. Some of his books have been sort of a blend of experience and fiction and philosophy and spirituality. He's just a master of this. The book, of course, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, later made into a film with Nick Nolte. This is a book that has changed people's lives and might change yours. Or maybe you can write a book that changes lives if you understand his perspective on character. Here's what Dan had to say. Dan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you, Bill. It's always a pleasure.
All right, standard first question. If you were going to offer one piece of advice to someone who wants to write, what would it be?
Don't.
No, you can't do that.
Nothing is easier than not writing, as we've all heard.
That's
yes,
true.
Well, it's been said, there was a book, It Would Be So Nice If You Weren't Here. I think it was by a comedian, and he gave the advice, if you want to be an actor, don't do that unless there's nothing else you can do. George Balanchine once said, I'm not looking for people who want to dance. He said, I'm looking for people who need to dance. And there are those of us who need to write. And there are those of us who just want to write. And I would count myself among them. I don't need to write, but people like Stephen King continually, Isaac Asimov once said, if I had 6 minutes to live, I'd type a little faster. Wow. So there are those who need to. And so advice, oh my gosh, your listeners must have heard so many different bits of advice, like rewrite. We've all heard that, the importance of it. All right, how about more standard? Know who you're writing for. Have a reader in mind, or a group of readers. Many writers that I've spoken with who are just beginning their career will write a whole book, and then I'll say, who is it for? Well, I'm not sure. It's for everybody. You know that. You've heard that. So have someone in mind. There are two kinds of writers, and this is a long answer to your question, but that's how
That's all right.
Amateur writers and professional writers. And it's not about skill level. There are, the old days, there were amateur athletes who were Olympic champions. It's not about how skillful, but amateurs do it for the love of it. We all know the root of the word. And they only have to ask one question. What do I want to express? Isn't that wonderful? They have a need to express, a desire to express, and they write it. Because they're writing it for themselves, for their own personal development, for journaling, for the joy of it, for the creative intoxication. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful. It's the purest form of writing. Right. But professionals, instead of just asking, what do I want to express, have to ask, what do people want to read? They have to have empathy and compassion for their reader to make it an engaging read for them. And so if those who aspire to professional writing cannot just say, what do I want to express, unless what they express just happens to resonate with many people interested in the same thing. That can happen. But ideally, someone would also ask, what might people want to read, and have those people in mind. And so that's kind of my long one thing.
Yeah, and the flip side of that advice is probably, if indeed you are just writing to please yourself, don't be disappointed when the masses don't decide to read it.
Exactly. But that's certainly okay. C. Day-Lewis, the father of Daniel Day-Lewis, the actor, he was a poet, an essayist, and he said, I write not in order to be understood, I write in order to understand. So that is one approach to writing, just the personal development aspect of it. And it can be very healing and clarifying when we write something down to see how we express it, what our thoughts are about it, whether it's nonfiction or it's creative fiction. So, well, there was one more quote. I love quotes. It's a hobby of mine, as you may know, Bill. It was better to write for yourself and have no audience than write only for your audience and have no self. So it's one of those paradoxes, maybe it's neither extreme, but it's both. Yeah. So that's my response to that simple question.
Well, you would know, having written all kinds of things. 16 books now at this point. Am I right about that?
Well, 17. It's hard to keep up with.
17.
Yeah, 17.
Is the Hidden School the 17th?
Yes, it is.
Okay. 29 languages?
They've been published in 29 languages, right.
And, of course, the film with Nick Nolte. When you were at WriterCon last year, you talked about the transformative arc, or getting that arc using characters, which I think you've done in fiction, nonfiction, creative nonfiction, whatever you want to call it. What do you mean by that? What are you talking about when you talked about the transformative arc?
Well, I think most of us instinctively know, whether or not we've studied the field of writing, that if our protagonist, our main character, or even a group of characters, if they change, we change with them. We see their growth, their evolution, just mirroring our own lives. We grow, we live, and we learn. Now, there may be some writers who write a character who deliberately doesn't change and things change around them, but they stay consistent. The lone hero or heroine who goes in with these particular set of qualities, and they go through an adventure because of those qualities, and they come out the same person, but they've found the bad person, they've solved the mystery, and so on. That can happen as well. But for what I think is inspiring fiction, aspirational fiction, if somebody is writing that or aspires to it, it's desirable to have the character live and learn and go through things. Now, certainly my first book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, is all about a transformation, if not an enlightenment, from a self-absorbed young college kid to someone who had a lot more wisdom and through their life experience and this old mentor, Socrates. So if someone does want to have a transformative character and have that arc throughout the book, they can do it one of two basic ways, maybe a combination. The first is just instinctually. Some writers just instinctively have their character learn through circumstances and come out the other side with some revelations, and the reader does too. But there is a methodical way to do it, which I came across by accident. I was years ago, I took part in a 40-day intensive training and then later in a 3-week advanced training with a particular school. I'll be writing more about it in my final book coming up. And in that school, we learned about aspects of the psyche, characters, if you will, that live within our minds. And are responsible for much of the contradiction we sometimes feel. The example I give, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, is the country preacher who every time he was praying, he was thinking about making love with his wife. And every time he was making love with his wife, he thought of praying. He never did